This is the second in a series of webinars that FCCPR is hosting. FCCPR, for the few people here who maybe don't know, is a radical multi-issue organization that emerged out of the Bernie Sanders campaigns. We've done organizing on a whole host of issues, including organizing the very, very large No Kings rallies in Greenfield. And we organize locally and regionally, but always with a national and even international perspective. And so that's why Stephanie is such an appropriate speaker for us to have here. Last week, we had attorney John Boniface speak with us. If you missed it, it's on YouTube, and we'll get the link out to that. And he's with the group Free Speech for People, and it's all about why and how ICE agents and other federal officials should be indicted by state attorneys general. And soon we're going to have another webinar with Jeremy Whalen, who is an exciting young candidate who's running against Richie Neal for Congress in Congressional District number 1. So let me just quickly introduce Stephanie, who I know from years ago when I worked for the Faculty Librarian Union at UMass Amherst, and Stephanie was one of the leaders of that union. And we've done various other organizing projects together. And I would just say that she is kind of the model of how you can be an academic and an activist at the same time. So Stephanie is a professor of labor studies and sociology at the City University of New York, and she's best known for research and activism around living wage campaigns and movements. She's the author of several books. I'm not going to list them all, but the most recent one, co-authored with Deepak Bhargava, is called Practical Radicals: 7 Strategies to Change the World. That sounds pretty exciting to me. So she's been traveling around the country a lot and reporting on what's going on, and she's going to share with us what she has learned and maybe even some tips on what we should be doing. So I'll turn it over to Stephanie.
Great. Thanks so much, Ferd. It's really great to join you all tonight. And thanks to David for inviting me, and to Judy too. And I really miss living in Western Mass and working with all of you. So I'm just going to talk a bit tonight from this book, Practical Radicals, that Ferd mentioned. It comes out of a fellowship program that we run at the City University of New York, the School of Labor Studies. And it was about 5 or 6 years ago when we were approached by some unions who asked us to start teaching a class on long-term strategy. And their view was they have a lot of organizers that have been in the movement for 10, even 15, 20 years, but have never been trained on strategy or never get the chance to really think about it. And we started a fellowship program that is for union leaders, but also all sectors: housing activists, environmental justice activists, racial justice activists. And it's a year-long program in which we spend time. People, they're organizing full-time, but they spend time to be in class together on Zoom and in person and really think about long-term strategy. And the challenge that we start with is the assumption that a lot of us have been doing a lot of work in our silos in which we might actually be winning things. Like when I was at UMass, we did win things. Our union won higher pay for adjuncts. I've worked on living wage campaigns. We win living wage ordinances. But we're all winning things in silos that don't necessarily add up to big change. And while even if we're winning, we seem to still be collectively falling backwards as the working class, as social justice movements. We're collectively losing power over time. And if we look at, the big picture, the rich, the billionaires have more and more money, they have more and more power. The system is more and more stacked against us. So what is it that we're doing wrong that we're, keep falling behind, even when we win little things? And so, we started to really study and learn from different traditions of long-term strategy, looking at both progressive traditions, left traditions, as well as on the right and business and political, and really think about, what it is that, we need to relearn in our tradition, in our history. And the first thing is, just really focusing on that we have been stuck in short-term campaigns that are often like just the win is something we might want to win in the next legislative cycle, or the next, the midterm elections, or the next collective bargaining agreement. And we've lost the muscle of thinking about a whole different world, the world that we want, the world that we deserve. If we as a working class actually governed, if we ran the world, what would it look like? It would be, a big transformative change. And we do these exercises. I do them in my classes with students, and I do them with unions and organizations around the country. And it's really clear that people have been trained to have small dreams and small hopes. And so when I ask them, what are you working on? It might be, a 5% raise in the contract, or we're trying to win this piece of legislation. But it's a skill and a muscle to really dream big. And so how do we rebuild that muscle and think about the world that we deserve? We used to do that on the left. Obviously, the left has been motivated throughout history by very grand ideas of a different system. But over time, due to the Red Scare, red baiting, attacks on the left, or even just avoiding conflict. Sometimes we just want to focus on what is the thing that we all agree on. Let's just talk about, in a workplace, we all agree on the wage increase, and we're going to avoid things that might be controversial, like race or immigration or abortion, or we're going to avoid that. So over time, we just got smaller and smaller in our demands, and just kind of focused on the least common denominator. But as long as we did that, the other side, they were not stopping their big dreams, right? They've been trying to control the world. They have 20-year plans, 30-year plans, 50-year plans, and they're willing to commit to building leaders and strategy to win governance and rule the world, right? So how can we rebuild that muscle on the left side of progressive movements? So that's, first of all, let's create more spaces to talk about vision, and let's not just be defensive and think about small things. We need to win the small things, and we need to go on the defense, but we want to tie it into the fight for something bigger. So first of all, there's that vision. Second of all, we also need to be much more realistic about the actual world we live in, right? So a lot of us tend to, not you on this call because you're all great organizers, but we hear calls all the time for let's have a general strike, or let's, have these grand ideas that are big vision, but they're not connected to a reality of really assessing our own power. How many members do we have? How many members show up for meetings? How many members are willing to commit to an action? How much money do we have in our treasury? Do we have a strike fund? Do we have mutual aid fund? If we take big actions, do we have support to have people's back? We need to be realistic about the power we have. And we also need to be realistic about the power the opponents have and what they're going to use against us. So what we need is both sharpening on both sides of that. And so I'm just going to share a slide here. That is what we talk about here is, sorry, can you see this screen here? We're talking about how to think about strategy as a bridge between the world as it is and the world as it could be. And so developing the muscles on both of those. The world as it could be is where we think about vision. Historically, we've had things like, the South African Freedom Charter, the Black Panther Party 10-point program. There's various forms of that, but there are ways to think big about big ideas. And then the world as it is could be something called power analysis. Some people talk about something called conjunctural analysis. There are different tools, but they're being rigorous about studying the world that we're working in and the terrain, the battlefield that we're on. Okay, so that's the first two steps. The third thing is then thinking about where we're realistic on the kinds of power we have and what we don't have. What is a strategy to get there? Because almost none of the things we deserve, something that we really is big, we want to win, we're going to be able to win it in the short term. So the idea here is, how do we think about reverse planning or reverse engineering to think about what's our goal in 10, 20 years, and working backwards, what are the steps we need to get there? So I want to share another slide. This is a tool that we use in the class. It's called the Long-Term Agenda. It was developed by an organization called the Grassroots Power Project. And what we encourage people to do is think about, first, what are the current fights we're working on? These are the coming year fights, coming year struggles. What are some stepping stone fights that would take us to, make more possible? Milestone reforms is another way to reform the system. And then finally, what are the structural reforms that would fundamentally transfer wealth and power on our issue, right? Maybe public ownership of our utilities. Maybe it's big things like universal health care. Maybe it's things like eliminating changing electoral college and completely restructuring the political system. These are the structural transformations that need to happen to really win big things. And then working backwards. And that's why actually the numbering here on these squares, first we start with our current fights, but then we go to the structural transformation and work backwards the steps we need to get there. So along the timeline, we're thinking this is 10 or 20 years. We're talking about first fights that build power. The small fights, if we win them, or even if we lose, we might build more leaders. We might change, people's minds. We might do education. We might new allies. And then we begin to build greater alliances. And then we begin to wage a battle of big ideas. So these are some ways and tools that we share within the fellowship program, thinking about how to develop that long-term strategy so that we're tying in the immediate short-term fights that are the defense. Like right now, we're fighting ICE as hard as we can. We have to do that. We have to keep organizing in our workplaces. We have to do that, but have it tied to this long-term plan. And in part because when we're engaged in these defensive fights, like right now, we're fighting to retain any shred of democracy in this country. We also want to admit we've never had a full democracy. This country has never achieved the promise that was made for a full and real democracy. So we don't want to go out there just saying, hey, let's defend democracy and return to what we had, because we've been in crisis for a long time. The system never really worked for us, right? We did win a lot, but there's been, impediments there, structural barriers to us having true and deep democracy. Okay, so a couple of other things in terms of this long-term strategy is, I've used the word we a number of times, and what's helpful is to begin to think more clearly and sharply about who we mean when we say we. For you all, you have an organization, it's clear who the we is, but what is the terrain in which you're working? And right now we know whatever the we is, we need to be building a bigger we. And if we are thinking about our current struggle, our current fight, the fight against authoritarian rule, fascist rule, whatever we want to call it, we probably need to be thinking about two different strategies. One is what we would call a strategy to build a coalition of the no. What is the united front of people that would fight against authoritarian rule? That's got to be a big coalition. And that's got to be a coalition that we might work with people that we don't necessarily agree on many things. We might work with moderate Republicans. We might work with military generals. We might be working with Chamber of Commerce, right? LA Chamber of Commerce, a couple of Chamber of Commerces have come out against what's going on with ICE. So we're building a large coalition of anyone who says no to the thing we're fighting against. The parallel is in South Africa. The United Front there said, we'll work with anyone who's against apartheid. That's our broad front, anyone who's against apartheid. The other coalition, probably smaller, is the coalition of the yes. And that's the people where we can form alignment around the world that we want, the world that we deserve. And so that is going to be, let me share a slide here. When we think about that, we think about the coalition of the no, united front against authoritarianism, and then the coalition of the yes, which is the alliance to build the world we deserve. Now we're going to think about all these different actors here, CEOs, military generals, veterans, faith leaders, community organizations, union members, union leaders, and thinking about bringing them into these coalitions. We need to be building a bigger we. Some areas it's going to overlap, some it's not, but we need a strategy for both. And historically, sometimes the left has a problem. We focus too much on the coalition of the no. We build this united front politics to defeat authoritarianism. If we continue just to do that, we're going to end up with really centrist to far right Democrats, right? So they're not going to get us to the world that we deserve. So we need at the same time to be building the coalition of the yes. Some people talk about this as the dual strategy of blocking the right and building the left. Different ways to think about it, but both of them involve building a bigger we. And then both of them involve this idea of the coalition of the yes is an alignment of forces, because there is no kind of progressive or left organization in this country that is large enough and powerful enough to win the world we deserve on their own. If you think about the UAW, they had a really successful stand-up strike in 2003, and yet they couldn't win some of their biggest demands, which were around expanded healthcare, pensions, shorter work week. And they knew that to win those things, they needed to be in alignment with a lot more organizations to build the power that they need. So the models to think about here, there's a couple models. Minnesota happens to be one of the models where unions, faith groups, and community groups have been working for the past 10 to 15 years to build that coalition of the yes. And what they did is to say, let's come to the table and be realistic about our differences. But what we agree on is we cannot win what we need to win alone. We need each other. So if you're big and you think you can win on your own, you don't need to be part of our alignment. Or if you're small and you don't have big dreams, you don't need to be part of our alignment. And if you don't have a base of members, you don't need to be part of our alignment. But otherwise, we're going to come together. We're going to stick with this over time. We're going to find shared targets. We're going to make a shared calendar. We're going to share escalation strategy, and we're going to share political education and leadership development. They've been doing that alignment for the last 10 to 15 years. And that's actually what's really put them in place to launch what they did last week, which is call for a general strike, because they had the infrastructure in place. They had the infrastructure to go on defense as well as to maintain offense. Okay, so that's one of the strategies, is building the bigger we, building the united front and the coalition of the yes and the no. The second strategy you may have heard people talk about in terms of fighting authoritarianism is the idea that we're not powerful enough to go after Trump directly. And so what we do to undermine authoritarian leaders is to go after the pillars of support that regime. There's business community, there's CEOs, there's corporations, there's chambers of commerce that support the regime, that fund it. Our labor, either directly or indirectly, some of our unions directly, but some of us just through our work are supporting the regime. Faith communities, education, civil service, military, police, and many more. And the idea is, how do we go and drive wedges and to make it too costly for these pillars to support the regime? Like right now, a strategy of going after particular corporations that are supporting ICE, like Hilton, that's housing ICE agents, Enterprise car rentals, certain airlines that are flying ICE agents, and really targeting those as a way to pull away that support and make it too costly for those corporations to be part of that. So that's the other strategy, is undermining and those pillars, winning defections, pulling people into defecting from support for the regime, and then welcoming the defectors. It's painful. Sometimes we don't want to do it, but we have to be ready to bring them into our coalition of the no, if not the coalition of the yes. And then the next piece, and that's related to that, is the strategy of non-cooperation. And this is what, is one of the most effective ways to deal with winning our demands, whether it's a defensive demand or an offensive demand. But non-cooperation is whether it's in a targeted boycott, economic, using our pension funds, sit-ins, other forms of disruption, and clearly, working people have the tools of strikes, slowdowns, work to rule, sit-ins, and so forth. And so there's tons of forms of non-cooperation. We need to practice them, get more comfortable with them. We might need to they might need to start small and get bigger. They're hard to do if you don't know that someone has your back. They're risky. But that's what it's going to take, building that muscle to win. And so then I'll just wrap up by talking about the May Day work that I've been involved with. And this is, I mentioned the UAW made the call for the 2028 strike. It's exciting in the idea of bringing as many unions as possible to align their contracts for around May 1st, 2028. The idea being that there could be multiple unions striking at once, going after large corporations, making demands at the bargaining table for things like healthcare, shorter work week, pensions, and also legislative demands, making them against our state legislatures, and also then putting them into the primaries because it's going to be May 2028. And also perhaps saying we want to have an election at all, right? So let's say they're trying to call off the election. So this is building the muscle to be able to engage either in a defensive strike at that time to just say we need an election, and or offensive and say these are the demands we want. And so one of the tools is when we talk about this backwards planning is to think about, this is May Day Strong, I'll talk more. So imagine it's January 2028. Imagine we've just elected a president who came in on a huge wave of union and community organizing, people canvassing all over the place, social movement, electoral work to bring in a candidate with a progressive working class agenda. Their first act is to pass Medicare for all. So what had to have happened to get us to that position? Working backwards, it means we would have had to have an election in 2028. At this point, we don't know that's going to happen. It means we would have had to have a strong candidate or one or more running in the Democratic primary, maybe even in the Republican primary, right? It means we might have had to have launched a massive national action in May 2028 to get that on the agenda. It also means we have to get through this year. We have to get through 2026. We don't know that the 2026 midterms are going to really happen or not happen without interference. So we need to be organizing now. This is not about waiting till 2028. It's about building that muscle today and continuing until after at least 2029, right? The strike is not an outcome. It's a tool. It's thinking about what is the vision we're trying to build. Okay, so that is just some of what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to stop there and we can move to discussion.
Thanks, Stephanie. That was great.
Okay.
So we're going to take questions now. People who want to ask a question, try to make it a question and not a speech, if at all possible. And you do that by, why am I freezing here? By using the Q&A function on the Zoom.
The react function. Raise hand function.
Sorry. Under react, there's raise hand. And then I will call on people as I see them. And Susan Triolo, you seem to be first.
Hi, Stephanie. I was like, oh, really? When you said that there was a 10 or 15-year plan in place for the general strike in Minnesota last week. Can you say more about that? Because I don't know if any of us know about that.
Yeah, I didn't mean it was a plan for the general strike. What I meant was it was a 10 or 15-year plan to take over. Like when they started organizing, it was a Republican-controlled state. So it was a plan to take over the state legislatively, put forth big legislative demands, and also increase organizing in faith, community, and labor. So they won a huge amount of legislative gains over the last couple of years. And it was in that context, they've built the capacity and infrastructure that they were able to call for a general strike.
So just a quick follow-up. I've heard the governor say, now they have universal child care. Is that part of what happened?
Yes.
Yeah.
They won a whole host of things. I can get you a list of things that they've won, but they when they started, they had big dreams that seemed kind of impossible. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Questions? Well, I'll ask a question, Stephanie. In terms of organizing now towards May of 2028, what what specifically do you see happening? Are there unions that are actively talking about it with their members, and how is that happening?
Yeah, so I would say it's very uneven. So what happened for May Day 2028 is the UAW focused on outreach to unions at the national level. And so in some places, some Unite Here, locals are engaged, AFT and NEA are engaged in some places, SEIU in some places where they were able to align contracts to expire close to May 2028. So that part is like where it's possible to do that. The second piece of it is that the Chicago Teachers Union in particular helped launch something called Mayday Strong, which is launched last year. And that's working with bringing together labor community faith groups in cities and regions, kind of to try and replicate what they did in Minneapolis. And so that is an effort to make these alignments. We don't have 10 years to wait, right? It's got to be done rapidly, and hopefully we can learn the lessons of what they've done in Minnesota and apply them quickly. So that Mayday Strong Network first did pulled actions together last May Day, again in Labor Day last year, planning for this May Day as well. But the idea is, can we begin to step up, not just have a picnic or, that's fine, but also other elements of action, more escalation. And to prepare for that, they're holding May Day solidarity schools in hopefully 30 cities by May Day. And that's, bringing people together to be learning skills of, how to talk to your coworker, how to talk to your neighbor, how what does it mean to be strike ready? Those kinds of workplace organizing things. And so that's kind of the idea is we need to build in these, so there's building for May Day as a structure test, as we say, building for Labor Day as a structure test, and building that muscle as we go.
Great. Okay, we've got a lot of hands here. So Molly and then Jan.
Hi, thanks so much, Stephanie. I think, listening to you talk, it sounds so, I think about Project 2025 and think that seems a little bit like that was the far right's, solution to this, right? And right now we're all sort of scrambling every day. It feels like we're trying to put out another fire and deal with what's coming at us day to day. And it sounds like, I'm thinking, okay, how does this happen? And it sounds like it's an imperative in large part for organizations to start working together and form coalitions, and sort of on the individual level, what would that look like getting involved with the organizations, or how does it sort of start to come together?
Yeah, ideally there's an anchor organization that can be, or a couple that can begin to launch that work. And so a lot of what I do in this training is I'm traveling all over the country, working with either a union or a labor council or interfaith networks. I'm off to Wisconsin to meet with farmers in a couple of weeks that are okay, we want to do this. And we spend a couple days going through mapping the ecosystem, who's in your community, who do you have relationships with, who has membership, what kind of power do they have, what are their potential overlaps. And so there are resources through Mayday Strong or through our network that can work with organizations, but it generally does take at least an established organization that can be an anchor to that work. Western Mass is a perfect place to do that because there are organizations in place that could begin to have these leadership schools and these strategy schools and start mapping out this kind of vision.
Great. Jan and then Dvoira. I'm sure I'm saying it wrong, but be ready. And
actually, Doug is going to ask the question from here.
Okay.
Hi, and thank you so much. sort of following on Molly's question, one of the things we find in some of our organizing work is that we are largely our little group, and there are other groups in other pockets that we don't necessarily travel with. And so I'm wondering if there are examples of and suggestions of how to reach across racial lines or across age lines, across some of these groups that if we're going to be in coalition, it can't just be us old white people.
Mhm.
Um, and we have not necessarily been always successful at doing that. So I'm wondering if there are models or suggestions of how to effectively really come to common cause with people who are maybe coming from a slightly different place. That overlap you talked about of what do we have in common, that can be challenging. Um, so yeah, well, that's my question. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I feel like what I might have said a year ago is different from what I'd say to now, because I think in this moment it's opening up spaces, more opportunities. And so right now, like even just to say we oppose ICE coming into our community or something like that, it opens up a whole new set of relationships that might be possible. That's an overlap in your work, right? So, I mean, I think what it means is first just thinking through the demographics of the area and where, you know, like there might be veterans groups, there might be farm worker groups, there might be churches, and thinking about potential areas where, again, in the past, you might not have had as much in common, but if it's in that space of the coalition of the no, we don't have to necessarily agree about anything else except for kind of fighting authoritarian rule, something like that. Then I think it's a lot of relationship building. And so some of that is like, you know, some of the groups in Virginia we're working with are unions and faith leaders that are just starting with lunches together, just trying to get comfortable with each other and share some language, and then kind of open it up to some of their membership and leadership, you know, like a bit broadening the circle. So those are some of the ideas. But it would take first just the research of thinking about where are people actually already clustered, like through a church or through some other kind of organization.
Great, thanks. Next, we have Dvoira.
Hey, yeah, you said my name perfectly. Thank you. Hi,
Oh,
Hi, Stephanie. And I think Stephanie, you know me as Deborah anyway, and I'm sorry my camera's not on. But anyway, I think you might have answered this, but when you're doing the workshops, or the multi-day sessions with folks, you're integrating the coalitions of no and yes with the pillars piece? And maybe this is too in the weeds and I'll just email you or something, but I'm excited about a model. I don't think that's me, but
somebody's tinkling.
I'm so sorry. Oh my God, it's my signal on my computer. It is me. That's so terrible. I'm so sorry. Oh my God. Wait, why? Oh my God. You get the question. Thank you.
Sure. I think I get the question. I would say it's not standardized. I mean, usually it kind of varies a lot because some of these workshops are like a whole, like over 3 months, like we have a fellowship, some are like 2 hours. So it really kind of depends of like thinking about this is the framework and what is it that you're working on. So I might need to like get more information on your question when
Yeah,
you know,
sorry. I'm not tinkling
sorry.
or twinkling anymore. I
Okay.
think what I was getting at is that I haven't seen a lot of models of trainings that are really doing both of those together. That's all, I guess. So.
Right. Yes, that's true. So some of this, I mean, well, going after the pillars of some of the trainings we're doing are on with rank and file union members, some of whom voted for Trump and some of who like are Trump sympathetic. But we're talking about what does democracy look like in the workplace? What does it mean to have democratic voice in the work? And then what would that translate into outside? And then thinking about pillars in terms of what are the ways in which our corporations are taking away our voice? So I think it kind of just a lot of it has to depend on the audience, and yeah, because it can really differ from the audience and who's in the room.
Okay, Miriam and then Dave. And remember to unmute yourself. Miriam, are you there? Okay, let's move on to Dave.
Hi, just I was wondering about New York and the election of Mandami, which seems to be that going on the offensive, and really projecting a plan to make the life better. But obviously, the right wing has a plan must have a plan to stop that. How do you see that playing out? And what do you see for the plan for moving ahead in the future?
Yeah, great question. And this one feels hard to answer because it feels like, when you're really in something so closely, it's harder to see it because it's so exciting and it's this crazy disjuncture between I feel personally like I spend half my life traveling around the country, like on the fight against authoritarianism, the other half here in New York City trying to build socialism. And it's like, what is happening? So, um, it just feels unprecedented on both sides. And so I think what's really exciting is the early moves by Mamdani, the people he's appointing and the programs he's appointing are really looking at structural changes that empower people, not just a policy. Like it's one thing to be like, okay, we can pass a policy that's like raise wages, but looking to places where can you use the city to actually make things run more democratically, bring in more organizational voice. There's this Office of Civic Engagement or Civic Empowerment. I forget the name, but it's kind of like bringing the concept of, a canvassing model actually to like, getting city services and engagement in city, getting people engaged in running the city. And so like at CUNY, we're actually also trying to launch a massive survey of city workers to ask them, what would you need to do your job better? Like there's probably some easy fixes. Like the city doesn't run well for a lot of people. And let's ask the workers themselves, what are their ideas to make it run better? So I think the more we can focus on those deeper structural changes that make the system more democratic, it's exciting because it appeals to people who are just cynical and down on government in general, the people that voted for Trump or who maybe also voted for Bernie because they're just like, I'm for the outsider, restoring the belief in the collective and a belief in government as a mechanism. But your point about how to counter the attacks, I mean, this one we have new organizations forming. We have one called Hands Off New York, which is exciting because it's brought in many, many organizations to like do that defensive work. But we're, getting people to tie in the defensive to the long-term offense. A lot of individuals want to do it. Getting the big organizations like unions on board is really challenging. Problem is in New York, there's still a lot of organizations that are big enough to win things on their own. And that means they don't work well in coalition because they think they don't need others. And so that's a real barrier. And so I think that's partly why Minneapolis could succeed and in some other places, because the organizations, the unions, the community groups are like, we can't win big things on our own. We need to work together. But New York's still, very narrow-minded. Wait, this is being taped, right? Uh-oh.
We'll edit that
Thanks.
out. Is Miriam back with us?
Yes, I figured out how to unmute myself. I'm on the phone. So a bunch of us are talking about citizen assemblies. To actually, there's an expert in Vermont, Terry Baruchin, and we're going to try to bring him in. I think people are talking about bringing him in to talk to us about citizen assemblies. And it's like a different form of government than Senate and House of Reps. It's where different citizen assemblies start and happen regularly, where groups of people can come together and make decisions and then expand, make laws and make actions and programs based on these citizen assemblies. And I'm wondering if you know about this, and if if anybody here would be wanting to help bring this guy in to talk to us about more about it and how to just have them all over the place in Western Mass and try to bring people together to form solutions and projects and plans.
I don't know the person you're referring to specifically. The concept of citizen assemblies or people's assemblies certainly is a great idea. I know, they've been experimented in other places and times, other countries, popular assemblies. And so, yeah, I think it could be exciting. I mean, the idea of participatory budgeting that was first from Brazil and then spread. The lessons from that are that, when people actually have power, when it's empowered to actually do things, and when it's actually an organizing project, it can be pretty exciting. If it becomes just a form in which you come together, but you really don't have any power and it's just a diversion, it could, and sometimes they're used to like kind of, let off steam and like just think, oh yeah, go and meet in your corner and make, conversation. So I think it's probably a lot of these ideas are great in the idea, and then how they're actually practiced, probably matters a lot. But I think that's exactly the kind of thing to experiment. So it sounds like a great idea.
Great. So we've got Madeline and then Kate.
Hi, thank you very much. Stephanie, I tuned in a few minutes late. What's the name of the organization that you're with?
Well, I work at the City University of New York, the School of Labor Studies. And then I was talking about Mayday Strong. Is it just a national network?
Okay.
Yeah, but the fellowship that we run is through CUNY.
CUNY and the Grassroots Power Project. So just a general question, sorry. You guys are going to record this and it will be available?
Yes.
Okay, great. Because I love the slides and I just wanted to, maybe they'll be in the recording or we could have a link to your slides somehow or some way. Okay, thank you.
We can definitely do that.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Kate and then Bob.
Hi, Stephanie. Thanks so much. My question was, are you thinking, or are people thinking that one of the reasons that Minnesota and Minneapolis was targeted was because of this organizing they've been doing for the last 10, 15 years?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, some people say they're targeted because of Waltz and because of it's just a democratic city. Some people say it's retribution for the George Floyd uprisings. So I've heard different reasons. I think if they really knew all the organizing that was going on for the last 10 or 15 years and still chose it, I think it would be, I think they didn't really know, because I think that's why they were able to mount such a fight back. What's kind of amazing is it's, from the outside, a lot of people think of this as a leaderless uprising in Minneapolis. Like there's not one dominant person who's like in every, TV interview, right? Because it's very leaderful. Like there's 15 or so organizations that have been part of this. They've all trained their elected leadership as well as their rank and file leadership. So, there's hundreds of leaders. And I actually think that maybe it was a bit more under the radar and maybe they didn't know about it. But who knows? It's hard to say for sure.
Thanks.
Hey, Bob.
Hi, Stephanie. Oh, you are so inspiring. It's hard for me to think about things other than leaders and who the leaders are. And when I look at Minnesota and Minneapolis, I don't know who the leaders are. They don't seem to be public and stand out. But from the very first time I heard Mamdani speak, it was like, this guy is amazing, and this guy's going to do it. And it appeared to me that he created this on his own, but there may have been a lot of work behind it that none of us actually see. He portrays it as he went out on the corners and he talked to people and he developed his strategy of what the people wanted to get done, and it sort of grew. And it probably isn't like that. Right now, we're all following this guy, Graham Plattner, up in Maine, who, when I hear him speak, and I've met his family, they are like Mamdani in their authenticness and in their energy. And are there leaders like that you can see stepping forward on the national level?
That's a hard question. I'm going to struggle with that one because I'm actually more aware of the other leaders that Mamdani worked with. Like he definitely did not do it on his own. And he does give a lot of credit to particularly the Democratic Socialists of America, which, in New York City is over 12,000 members right now. And there are people that have been building this socialist in office project for, the last 10 or so years. I'll give you some resources on that. So there's an incredible team, very deep bench of talented organizers and strategists who have been working towards that. That being said, he is clearly a talented, extremely talented, as some people say, once in a generation politician. And on that, I just don't know. That's not my skill set, is like picking out like people who have that kind of charisma or skill. I'm not sure.
Graham got recruited by a union, and I'm not sure, but a large union who scoured Maine to find the right person and chose him. And it was hard for them to convince him that he had a chance and should do it. And the person he wanted to talk to was Mamdani. And they flew Mamdani there the next day to convince him that this was not a hoax, that he wasn't being spoofed, and that this was for real. And but then when we all read Project 2025, it was, so well thought out and so broad, and it seemed so impossible, and yet it's nearly completed. And do we have the Heritage Foundation kind of one of them? They're the groups I think that you referred to. But anyway, thank you for being here and doing this.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I will say that, because I get to work with so many leaders, and by that I mean elected leaders and, volunteer leaders and shop floor leaders and community leaders. I mean, there's tremendous talent out there. So that's one thing. And a lot of them are young people. I mean, I'm in awe, like I'm intimidated by these 22-year-olds, so, I think there's a whole group of talented people out there. I think someone else has to figure out which one of them could run for office.
Okay, I see one more hand up, Louise.
Hi, Stephanie. Thank you. I think it's very refreshing to hear some of your takes. The endpoint is not a strike, but what are we trying to achieve? Different thoughts that you brought up. I wonder if you see a way to leverage our weakness. We don't have a heritage foundation that's been at this for 30 years with lots of, funding. What we have is this myriad of organization, which you've already referred to. And I've been attending meeting after meeting with one organization and then another, and everybody's got a game plan and everybody, has got a different idea. And I think this decentralization can be an asset because, of course, in times of serious shifts in paradigm like we're experiencing now, it makes it difficult to just strike out any one organization because there's so many. Do you see maybe like two approaches? I mean, there are organizations where we can work on specific topics like Medicare for all, but then there's also like the bushfire. I attended a meeting of the Women's March last night, and we're all on signal. We all have our marching orders. They're super well organized, and it's just this sort of wildfire. I can't think of any other way to. So I guess, what is your take on how we can best leverage the structures that we have, that make our strength and our weakness?
Yeah, that's a great question. I agree with you. There's a strength and a weakness. One encouraging sign is that a number of these national networks are organizing, collaborating a lot more. So I just came from a meeting in Atlanta in December of national networks, including organizing Revival, People's Action, the Fight Back Table, some unions. And everyone looked ahead. This was in December, and they're like, what is 2026? What's the arc of the year going to look like? Let's divide the work. what are some of the main actions we can plan around. They lifted up 5 main actions of another No Kings March in March, May Day actions, July 4th, Labor Day, and then something around the election. They talked about, who kind of covers what terrain. They talked about some shared demands. So the level of political maturity and emotional maturity I saw in the room was much higher than I've seen in a very long time. And I think because the stakes are high and people know what's at hand, it was like, this is a time we have to get our act together and work together. Where we don't agree on things we might have fought before, but we're going to pull together. It doesn't clean up the fact that there's a lot of different organizations and networks, but people were trying to be more clear about like, okay, this is the organization that kind of works in rural areas. This is the groups that are like trying to like get strikes going in workplaces. These are the groups that are really focused on voter turnout and voter protection. So I think there's some movement in that direction. I mean, what we need in other countries, you would have a political party that would bring this together.
Yeah,
obviously we
what a
don't.
concept.
So that's the problem. So if you're asking me how
we're
that's
going to get a
break,
250th celebration of our democracy.
yeah.
So I
Yeah.
think we have time for one more question, and then
Thank you.
we'll move towards wrapping up. David.
Yeah, I'm just going to follow up on what Louise was saying. So when we started FCCPR about 10 years ago, we decided that we really wanted to build coalitions wherever we could. For one thing, Western Mass is the really radical part of the state. So to get anything done in Massachusetts, we have to work with people in the East. So one of the groups we belong to is the Mass Political Action Organizing Committee, which has been around for a few years. And one of the things that this group did is we put together a spreadsheet of about 300 groups in Massachusetts. And we sent them all questionnaires to see what they were doing, what they want to do, We got very few responses from that. And in the Valley here, we have, I don't know how many groups. I mean, we did a Venezuela demonstration a week or two ago, and there were 9 co-sponsors. Some of these groups we haven't even heard of before. So I'm thinking there's really too many coalitions. I don't know what the solution, a party would be great. DSA is active here. They involved with this. We're doing something this Saturday, and there's about 8 or 9 groups involved in that. So people are definitely starting to work together, and we belong to I don't know how many different coalitions. So I guess the question is how do we pull all these coalitions into one big coalition that's going in the same direction?
Yeah.
And it's worth just adding on to that yes, this is the progressive left part of the state, but it didn't used to be that way. And Dave talks a lot about this used to be a solid Republican area, and there's been just quite a history of patient organizing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't know if I can come up with a good answer, especially in 4 minutes. But one thing I would say is like also just like if there's 300 groups, but some of them have 3 members, like just drop it. Like I would say just like focus on a coalition of the willing of some larger groups that have a base that actually have members and are doing things. And then just like a coalition doesn't have to have everybody on it. And I think just even starting small with people that want to move together is a good start. And I don't know, how we bring everyone together. I mean, I think it's just a time of experimentation, and So I wish I had a better answer for you.
Well, we ran out of hands and we ran out of time all at the same time. So we're well organized here. Do you have any final things you want to say, Stephanie?
I guess I would just wrap up. A couple people mentioned Project 2025, and some people I think we want that on our side too. It's not just what's on paper though, it's the organizing that went behind it to build that alliance. And it's also like being ready to like govern, like not being afraid of power and saying we're going to fight for this. I will just end by like saying that it's really scary. It's a lot of horrible stuff out there, but so many people are in motion. So many people are doing things. I'm meeting with, like, I never expected to be like meeting, with the Catholic churches in the middle of, rural Virginia. And so it's very, inspiring. Like it might not be in the news. We're not reading about it. They're not at all the marches, but people are really doing things and bringing, people out for the first time ever. So that part is great. And I think, I would just say maybe plugging into maybe there could be a May Day Strong in Western Mass. I'd be happy to help connect that or think about how to do that. And yeah, thank you so much. It was an honor to be invited to speak.
Well, on behalf of everybody, thank you. This was great. I think we're going to end now, but we could open up the chat for a few minutes. You don't have to respond to things there, Stephanie, but if people want to just share any thoughts, that'd be great. We'll capture that.
Great.
And everybody else, thank you. Have a good night.